Well, hello, everyone. It's indeed a pleasure speaking to everyone. And this is just an information seminar about glaucoma. One of the major eye diseases, glaucoma, is a disease where the pressure builds up inside the eyes. Often it's called a thief in the dark. And the reason it is because by the time people have any symptoms, it's usually gone too far. So the idea is that let's get early eye examinations and regular eye examinations in order to pick up glaucoma so that it does not become an eye-threatening disease. So again, glaucoma is a disease where the pressure builds up inside your eye, and often you're not aware of it. So I'll get you to pop to the next slide. So when the pressure builds up inside the eye, what happens is it exerts pressure on the optic nerve. The optic nerve is like a cable, if you can imagine, and it sends all the stimuli from what you see into your brain that then processes what you're going to make out of the information that you saw. So if you can imagine, the eye is like a big terminal storing information, and that information is all siphoned to your brain to process through the optic nerve. So when the pressure builds up inside the eye, it exerts pressure on the back of the eye, kind of like laying a board on grass. And underneath that grass, if you don't relieve the pressure, what ends up happening, everything dies. So if we have an increase in pressure, it destroys the neurons around the optic nerve, they die off, and then you have a void of information getting to your brain, and thus you cannot see. Next slide. So today what we're going to discuss is the impact of glaucoma, the different types of glaucoma, because there's more than one. But I want you to understand the end effect of all glaucoma, regardless of how it's caused, is loss of vision. And the sad part of it is that people don't come in often enough to determine if there's a problem. Because once the problem has occurred, glaucoma is very difficult to control. And the visual field loss that has occurred is not repairable. In other words, once it's gone, it's gone. Again, like laying a board on grass, once the grass is dead, it's done. So next slide, please. Now, there are many different types of glaucoma, but once again, the end effect is all the same, a loss of peripheral field of vision. We're going to really discuss two types of glaucoma. One is the trabecular meshwork. This is the meshwork around the center of the eye, right in here. It produces what we call the aqueous humor, which is in the front part of the eye, and that is constantly draining between this area right here, the iris, and the lens itself. So the first one is open angle glaucoma. That is where this trabecular meshwork gets all plugged up. And so basically, if you can imagine, it's like a little sieve where basically everything gets clogged. So the sink gets clogged. And when that happens, the pressure builds up and the drainage of the fluid cannot happen. The other type, which is more acute and usually happens in one eye, can cause extreme pressure. That is when the angle through which the fluid drains right here gets plugged. And when that angle gets plugged, the pressure builds up so much that it is painful. Usually it starts with one eye, and the pressures will go from a normal pressure reading of somewhere around 20 to 40 to 50, and you very quickly lose vision. Next slide, please. So once again, glaucoma, in all cases, no matter how it's caused, is an increase of pressure that damages the back of the eye, the optic nerve, destroying the optic nerve so that it cannot lead the information that it needs to the brain. Next slide. So what happens? So if we see here on the left-hand side, This is what we see as a normal optic nerve. Now, we should understand the optic nerve is this big cable, again, with all the how shall I say, the neurological impulse that goes to the brain so that you can process what you're seeing. So this is what a normal optic nerve looks like. As the pressure builds up, that optic nerve, the little white area, becomes big and white as more neurons are knocked off, and you start losing your peripheral field of vision. So we really want to get you in the early stage on the left-hand side, so you never get to the right-hand side, because once those neurons are lost, they are not regenerated. Next slide, please. Well, when we see you to do an eye examination, we do a number of tests. It used to be in the olden days of where I come from in the 1970s that we just looked at the pressure and then we looked at the optic nerve. Now we have many discrete ways of determining whether or not you have a condition called glaucoma or not. So what we have is most important, called ocular coherence tomography, or if you will, OCT. And really what it does is it goes with a number of scans, like 25,000 scans around the optic nerve, and measures the exact thickness of the tissue around that optic nerve. So you can see that we're measuring it, and glaucoma on the right-hand side, you see the red area, that measures the thickness of that tissue. So when we saw you at the very bottom, let's say, for example, let's say a year ago, and we saw that the tissue was in the yellow zone, it was the tissue around that optic nerve at 98 microns. Well, we know that we've got a little bit of a concern, but we did nothing about it, or the patient didn't show back for a number of years. And now we're at 74 microns. We can definitively, without you saying anything or without us making any error on any behalf, we can go back and do the same tests and see that now the tissue has more tissue has been lost. We know that we have a problem here. So when we start getting into the red zone, glaucoma always affects the inferior quadrant first. We can see we're from 98 microns to 74 microns. We have a problem. And that's the whole idea, that we want to get you in soon enough so that we can determine if there's a problem long before you lose any peripheral field of vision. So now when we do an eye examination, not only are we checking visual acuity, not only are we checking pressure, because pressure itself really can vary throughout the day, like blood pressure in a way. So it's not really diagnostic of many things. Also looking at the optic nerve, it used to be some people who just normally have a large kind of crater-like looking area, but yet the tissue around the optic nerve is good. So that's not always reliable. But the OCT is really, really important, because it can tell you definitively, independent of you or I or anyone else, that changes are occurring, so that we have a chance to deal with it. That's why these new technologies, although sometimes we don't like them, they are really highly diagnostic and very quickly to determine a baseline of where we can compare you to yourself. Next slide, please. So with visual field loss, here we are. We have the area that you see in the left-hand side, dark. It begins like that. And over a slow period of time, especially with open angle glaucoma, which is the one where what we call the trabecular meshwork, or the little area through which the fluid is produced and drained, gets plugged. Over time, you develop more visual field loss. You don't feel it until you start only having central area vision. And then we're in an accident because we didn't see anybody. And so, be gentle with those that have road rage, because maybe they actually didn't see you because they haven't had their eyes examined and they have no visual field. Again, often with the open angle glaucoma, it's a slow process developing over a period of time, but damage to the optic nerve. And once this is dark like this, that area will not come back. There's nothing we can do to bring it back again. And it's sad, because really it did not have to happen. Again, slide, please. So again, this is normal vision. Look at that beautiful area there that we're on the beach somewhere, maybe Hawaii, I don't know. And then this is how it is. And again, so if you can imagine driving, so I'm driving along and somebody's on my side, and I could easily miss them and not even see them and not be aware of it. So, I mean, this is why accidents happen. This is why we've got to be very careful in driving. And probably this is why it's so important to have a regular eye health examination. The incident of glaucoma, is a slow process again in most cases. And of course, after the age of 60 and 65, we know that in Alberta, for example, eye examinations are covered annually by the government, starting at age 65 to the end of our life. So really no reason not to come in. So the old adage where, if it isn't broken, we don't have to fix it. But how do you know if it's not broken? And when it's broken, well, good luck on the fix. So it's a good idea to come in for a regular eye health examination. Next slide, please. So who's at risk for glaucoma? Well, there are certain people, certain races, Afro-Americans and Asians are more at risk than Caucasians in glaucoma. People over the age of 60 are more at risk for glaucoma. We've been around longer and things can change because sometimes that trabecular meshwork can become plugged. Also, certain drugs can lead. For example, if you're on steroid treatment, that can increase the pressure. There are many diseases that can cause an increase in your intraocular pressure. And diabetes, where if we have not controlled blood diabetes and the blood vessels at the back of the eye start to leak, they can cause traction and blocking of blood vessels that can lead to glaucoma as well. Physical injuries to the eye. For example, somebody who has a blow to the eye or a cut to the eye can damage the angle through which the fluid drains. That can lead to an increase in your pressure as well. Steroid use. Sometimes, in rheumatoid arthritis a long time ago, we've gotten better, but used to give steroid treatment to prevent the pain. That can cause the pressure to go up and also lead to cataract development, or I should say glaucoma. Cataract development is the other thing. This is the lens right here. When that lens starts to get really big and thick as a cataract develops, it can block the angle through which the fluid drains, increasing the pressure as well. So there are medical conditions, and again, diabetes being one of them. And of course, one of the strongest ones are a history of glaucoma. And that is if your mother, father, siblings had glaucoma. As we get older, the predisposition to glaucoma increases. Next slide, please. So what are the symptoms of glaucoma? Often, there are none. In the cases of open-angle glaucoma, you don't really feel a thing. That's why it's called a thief in the dark, until you start losing your peripheral vision. And then it becomes very difficult to control. Closed-angle glaucoma can happen sometimes overnight where you've had extreme pressure. So you get an extreme headache. You may get distortion of vision. Sometimes when the pressures are really high, you'll get a red eye. When the pressures get so high, you actually get physically sick. And people will start to vomit. It's terrible, actually. And sometimes what can happen is halos around light. These are all really vague things and really are glaucoma that's gone really bad. And I would think that at that time you would know that you had a problem. Halos around lights, colored halos around lights are sometimes that as well. But often it's more common in cataract development where things are distorted at night and so on. So these are symptoms of glaucoma, but I probably would not rely on those too much unless you had an acute case, in which case I would hope that you'd be aware of. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, there are two basic types of glaucoma. There's the open-angle glaucoma called OAG, which is a slow, progressive type of glaucoma, which often, over a period of time, becomes an issue. And then there's the acute angle closure glaucoma. Those are the ones where you may get the symptoms of nausea, extreme pain, and halos around lights. Next slide. So open angle glaucoma and closed angle glaucoma. The most common one, as we mentioned, is open angle glaucoma. So if you look at this, the ciliary process, which is inside the eye. Let's just go to the very beginning. So the outside of the eye is the cornea. And then there's a big chamber there called the anterior chamber. The iris, the colored part of your eye, it as it connected to the ciliary process, and that ciliary process produces the fluid that keeps the front chamber going and filled with fluid so it doesn't collapse, but it's constantly draining around the lens, around the iris, and around the lens into the back of the eye, into what we call the vitreous, and that's how things work. Now, what happens in open angle glaucoma is that trabecular meshwork, which is tied to the iris, sometimes gets blocked. And when that gets blocked, it's like a bad plumbing problem. It just doesn't drain. So really what we have to do is we have to open that area. And so it used to be that what we would do is give you, and we still do, sometimes drops. And the drops will cause the pupil to become smaller and thus open up the angle. But sometimes that will not happen. And so what we have to do is now we use laser and make a little hole. So we make a few holes so that the fluid can drain. That is an open angle, the most common type of glaucoma, which is a slow process, and often genetically, somebody in the family has glaucoma and you just happen to get the right gene. The other one is the closed angle glaucoma, and that is, for example, the lens that you see there, and that's why in some cases when it's hard to control glaucoma and you've got a cataract, we may remove the cataract sooner because as that cataract swells, the iris can get attached to it, can meet the iris, and therefore the fluid cannot drain. That's the one that causes usually the symptoms that people will notice with glaucoma. So sometimes people will come in with the pressure of 20, and then we see them again as the cataract evolves, and the pressures are now 30. The easiest treatment for that one is simply to remove the lens. Next slide, please. So open angle glaucoma is once again the same effect of all glaucoma. There's with normal vision, early glaucoma, which you wouldn't notice because you don't feel anything. You have some peripheral loss of vision, but who checks out in the periphery anyway, unless you come in for an eye examination? We're always checking that until you knock off somebody in the road because, frankly, you didn't see them. And then, the highway traffic board pulls you off the road until you get your eyes examined, and oh my, we've lost our visual field. Not good. Next slide. So open angle glaucoma, once again, is obstruction of this area, which is the trabecular meshwork. It gets all plugged up in here, and there's a progressive loss of vision over a period of time. And of course, as the pressure builds up, it exerts pressure on the back of the eye, which is the optic nerve. And it destroys what we call the ganglion cells, or those cells that give you all the innervation to your vision so that you can see to the brain. That's called open angle glaucoma. And often there are different ways of measuring pressures. So for example, there's a puff of air that you get in your eye. The average pressure reading, we want around 20. But if we have the applanation, which is where we actually put a device in your eye, it's like kilometers and miles, that would pressure a normal. So 21 with a puff of air would be something like about 17 or 18 with the one where we put a little device on your eye. So it's the same measurement. So people get excited and they say, oh, well, I tell them their pressure is 20 and they go, oh, no, that's awful. No, it's not, because in the other one that you had done where you may have had an applanation done where something was put in your eye, that would be equivalent to, say, 16, which would be normal. Next slide, please. So the risk factors of open angle glaucoma, which is the most common one, are your age, your family history. If you're high myope, that's you're really nearsighted. If you've had a previous eye injury, and if you're using steroids. And steroids, and I don't mean to build muscles, I mean steroids are used often. For example, in rheumatoid arthritis, sometimes we can use it. Some different diseases to control the autoimmune response, we can give you massive doses of steroids just to help out. So how do we look for glaucoma? Well, all you have to do is have a complete eye health examination done. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at your pressures. Also, now many people have had refractive surgery done, like LASIK, for example, where we've thinned the cornea. And so even though the pressures may read normal, they may not be because the cornea has been thinned. So if you're using the applanation where we put a little device on your eye, that reading may not, in fact, be correct. And then the optic nerve, we're looking at always the optic nerve, usually photographing the optic nerve. Also, there's other types of glaucoma. There are many different types of glaucoma where we have sometimes the lens, the part that develops a cataract will flake off and plug the angle. That's called pseudoexfoliation. And of course, there's diseases, inflammatory diseases, high blood pressure, and of course, there are abnormalities that can also affect whether you develop glaucoma. And again, the easiest way to find out is simply to come in for a complete eye health examination once a year. Next slide. The treatment often we start is with glaucoma medication. However, glaucoma medication, the compliance level is really bad. And that's why often if we find that compliance is bad, because the drop should be taken the same time every day. Usually it's taken before night because the pressures happen to usually increase at the end of the day. And so we want to avoid a pressure spike at the end of the day. It's very important that the glaucoma medication be taken the same time every day, because the whole idea is to prevent the pressure from going up. But because you don't feel anything and the drops cost money, you have to remember to take them. Glaucoma medication isn't so user-friendly because it often burns and stings. People say, you know what, I don't feel anything. I feel worse when I take these drugs, and I even taste them sometimes. I'm just not going to do it. Not good. So in those cases, we may resort to a laser surgery right away and just open up the little holes, and so the fluid can drain. Next slide, please. So the less common one, which really affects one eye usually first, and often only one eye, is closed-angle glaucoma, where you have a rapid rise in the pressure. And that is where you'll have headache, you'll have eye pain, and the pressures can go from an average of 20 to 40, and you're wiped out. The pain is excruciating. And usually that, with small little eyes and so on, or you're really farsighted, you're more at risk because the eye is small in itself. So that's why some people are more genetically inclined. This depends on Asians who usually are more at risk for open angle or closed angle glaucoma than say a Caucasian. Next slide, please. So in those cases, we have to reduce the pressure immediately. Closed angle glaucoma or narrow angle glaucoma can really fit into the same category. And what we do is we make little holes, as you can see right there along the iris, to allow the fluid to drain. And that can reduce the pressure very, very quickly. But those pressures we have to get down like right away, because the longer the pressure is, it's kind of like having a stroke of the eye. The longer the pressure is high, the more visual field you lose. And of course, that's not coming back. Next slide. So you have pain. Next slide. And again, as I mentioned the symptoms before, these are rarity, usually in one eye only. Of course, there are other things that can cause pain just in one eye. But sometimes these pressures can build up because if you have what we call an iritis, an inflammation of that anterior chamber, there are a lot of plus cells that can actually plug that meshwork and cause the pressure to go up. So, for example, people that have various chronic conditions that are autoimmune can get an iritis, which is an inflammation in the front part of the eye that can cause the pressure to go up and cause an angle closure glaucoma. Next slide, please. And usually laser is done there. The laser is not painful itself. It's just takes seconds to do, opens up the angle, and there you go. There are, however, a limited number of times you can use laser, usually 3. although that's changing over time as well, and research goes on because laser surgery is relatively new today, say in the last 10 years or so, and highly effective. Next slide. Again, these are just showing what goes on with the little holes made by a laser, which takes very, very quick and often very effective. Next slide. And again, there's a little hole made by the laser. And of course, it's under the lid usually, so you don't see it. Again, next slide. Now, acute angle closure, again, those are where, again, it becomes very painful. The pain is excruciating. The cornea becomes, and those pressures have to be reduced immediately. Often you're hospitalized for that, and with a number of intravenous treatments. Otherwise, the cornea, the other part of the eye, will become very hazy. Not to be confused by cataract, but everything becomes swollen and edematous. In other words, it becomes so cloudy that you cannot see. So those are really ocular emergencies, and we have to reduce the pressure immediately. Otherwise, you have risk of losing the eye itself. Next slide. Now, we missed the topic of cataract, so I briefly want to go through it with you. Cataract is what most people fear if you're, depending on what age you are. Today, cataracts are like nothing. The biggest fear of a cataract is waiting to get it removed, because it's really aggravating. But basically, that lens behind the little black hole, the pupil, becomes cloudy. And cataracts are usually caused by aging. I mean, there could be trauma to the eye as well. If you had a trauma to the eye many years ago, often as you get older, that material becomes opacified and you develop a cataract, which means that you cannot see, and we have to remove the cataract. Now, that's a fully mature cataract. That's pretty bizarre. We really don't allow the cataract to get to that stage anymore. So the biggest thing about cataracts is that the biggest drawback is if you're on blood thinners, you've got to take you off the blood thinners for a bit so that we don't get a bleed. The cataract surgery today is, a 20-minute procedure. Usually there are no complications as such, as long as you're in reasonable health. And then, as soon as the cataract is removed, wow, you can see again, everything's bright and clear and amazing. So things have really changed from long ago, where removing the cataract was awful, where you ended up with these very thick prescriptions that had to be sitting in a certain position, and we didn't have materials for glasses the way we do now either. So cataract today is removed, and an artificial lens implant is put in there, and you can see almost instantaneously. So things really change. But the reason I said it's associated with glaucoma, as I mentioned, is this cataract gets big like this, it swells, and it can close the angle off, and you can end up with pressure going up very quickly. So sometimes the form of removing the cataract will actually help with the glaucoma or eliminate any problem also. Next slide, please. So I just wanted to mention for a cataract, just briefly to go through it. Behind that little black hole called the pupil is a lens. The purpose of that lens throughout our life is to focus the rays of light that come into your eyeball to the back of the eye, to the retina, so that information can be taken by the optic nerve to your brain so it can process the information that you see. But as we get older, that lens starts to lose its clarity. And of course, absorption of UV over time will cause that lens to become opacified or blurry. And as the cataract grows, then light doesn't get through and you can't see. So today what we do is we remove this lens, replace it with an artificial lens, and we calculate the power, and so you're good to go. Now, of course, in removing a cataract, there are 3 different types of lens implants that you can put in today. The basic one that will take all of your prescription will be calculated. So if you had a high prescription and you couldn't see without your glasses, now we can calculate the lens implant power that you want, put it into this lens implant, and man, you can see in the distance like you haven't seen before, and you don't need glasses. However, you will not be able to read. So we have another lens implant that if you have a little bit of astigmatism, then we can correct that. So that's one cost, which would be about $2,000 for both eyes. And then you can have a multifocal lens implants, like putting a progressive lens in your eye. So you've got distance and close up, which will cost you anywhere from $5,000 to $10,000, just depending on what you want. However, in all cases, once that lens and the artificial lens implant is put in there, you still often need some form of protection, for example, for UV, because now the lens is removed and you don't want to damage the retina with UV. But often you still need, it's not perfect. You still, depending on whether you're working on a computer or what you're doing, you still often need a residual prescription. So again, there are three types of implant: those covered by the government that will correct the distance, those with astigmatism that you have to pay for, and those of the multifocal implants, the most expensive ones at all. One thing I want to point out with cataracts is that when the surgery is done, it is imperative that you do not move around and do a lot of exercising right after the surgery. Because when we remove the cataract, we remove the front part of the lens, we remove the guts in the inside, we leave the back part of the original lens there so that the lens implants can scar onto the back capsule. So if you start running around doing exercise, jogging, and all the rest of these things, and that implant is not scarred on or itself adhered to the back of that capsule, you may have it dislocated, in which case you've got a big problem. And that's where sometimes people end up seeing double vision and problems like that. So you got to be very careful right after the cataract surgery so that that lens adheres to the back capsule properly. Now, people ask me about secondary cataract, and people have said, I have the cataracts removed, now I've got another cataract. No, actually you don't. It's not the same surgery. What happens is that in some cases that how many cases, I don't know, maybe 10% or so, after a year or maybe 5 or 6 years or later on, that back capsule from your original lens gets cloudy. And so therefore we use laser and open up the membrane and you're good to go. That's called a secondary cataract. The cataract did not come back again. So just to let you know on that. So that's cataract surgery in itself. Next slide, please. So glaucoma can lead to permanent blindness. Often it has no symptoms. We're just going to go cataracts versus glaucoma. Glaucoma is an eye disease and often a genetic predisposition. It's where the pressure builds up and damages the optic nerve. It's often treated, we start usually with eye drops and then we go to laser surgery, or we may do laser surgery first, just depends. It is extremely important to be caught early, and the only way you're going to catch glaucoma really in the early stages is by a regular eye health examination. That's it. That's all. Cataracts rarely leads to blindness, although it does, especially in the third world where cataracts are not dealt with. In fact, cataract is the number one cause of visual loss or blindness in the world, is simply because they don't have the amenities that we have here. Cataracts will lead you to blurred vision. And of course, if you live long enough, if you live to 100, you're probably going to develop a cataract no matter what. It is an aging process, just like getting wrinkles, okay? A cataract, once you remove it, the cataract, usually people can see right away. It's amazing. Everything's clearer, brighter, doesn't have a yellow hue to it. As I said, the worst part of cataract surgery is getting into the system. So getting into the system is the most important. That's the longest delay going. And that's probably the most frustrating for all, because when you can't see, you can't function, you can't do a lot of things. So it's really important, once again, if you have a small cataract evolving, that you get in to be checked on a regular basis so that you don't end up on the waiting list that can go on for, 2 years or more at times. Next slide, please. Now, diabetes is also a big concern. In fact, diabetic retinopathy, or the effects of diabetes, is probably one of the the number one cause of visual loss in Canada today. And it doesn't have to be. Type 2 diabetes is one of the worst. And it's usually, over the age of 40 where we have a controlled diet, but we're still eating the same stuff we did when we were 12. And except that we're not growing anymore. So except for the wrong way. So diabetes uncontrolled. And, we'd like to be around an A1C when you go to see a family doctor. Always ask what your A1C is. And if you can remember, 65 is when you get some kind of a pension, I guess. Well, for how long, I don't know. But let's say you're getting a pension at 65. Just remember 65 that way, because 6.5 is where you want the A1C to be to not really have any problems. And the A1C is when you see your family doctor, they're doing an average of over the 3 months to see kind of where your sugar levels are like. So 6.5 is the ideal one, where probably you're not going to get any diabetic retinopathy. But what happens in diabetes is when the sugar levels go up and down, the blood vessels that are very fragile at the back of the eye bleed. And when they bleed, what happens is fluid accumulates in the layers of the retina. And sometimes that fluid will retract and cause everything to get glutted up. It can even go to the trabecular meshwork, and that's when things get out of hand. When you get bleeding in there, plug that meshwork, causing the pressure to go up. And it is what you consider a real mess. So when we have undiagnosed diabetes, vision is one of the first signs that the sugar levels are out of control, where people come in and 3 months later, they'll say, you gave me the wrong prescription because I can't see out of these glasses anymore. I said, well, I think you better get your sugar level checked. And they're reading a normal of 6.5. Their reading would be something like 24. And so what do you think? We're going to have a major problem with vision. So when that happens, you not only get bleeding on the retina, which is really bad, and that's where you end up seeing the ophthalmologist, where you've got blood in layers of the retina, and that blood has to get out of there immediately, because if it's not, then what ends up happening is formed scar tissue. And then the scar tissue, you start losing vision. So that's when you have people going off to the ophthalmologist to get shots in their eyes to prevent the bleeding, or to sclerose those blood vessels so they don't bleed. With people, when they are maybe undiagnosed diabetes, they will say all of a sudden they can't see. And yes, they come in. And that's because everything's swollen. That lens that develops a cataract later becomes swollen, and then it becomes opaque, and then you can't see. So diabetes is bad on every level. The bleeding on the layers of the retina. You got to go and see an ophthalmologist to get shots in your eyes to prevent the bleeding, and the development of cataracts and so on. So just remember, A1C 6.5. If you can stay there, you'll never have a problem. Next slide, please. So diabetes, once again, you get fluctuating of vision. And the reason I'm bringing this is because, it can lead to glaucoma. It leads to cataract formation. It leads to glaucoma because everything gets blocked all up with the bleeding of the inside the eye. And of course, it leads to retinopathy. You see all those little spots on the right-hand side. That's all scar tissue in the most critical area of vision, the central area of vision. When that happens, man, we can't reverse it. That's the sad part of it. So the key thing, if you want to keep your vision for a long time, don't become a diabetic. And if you are, be a controlled diabetic. And again, just remember, seniorhood, I suppose, is 65. Remember, an A1C of 6.5 is ideal. So when you're seeing your family doctor, know what your A1C is. Ask. And if you can stay around 6.5, you're good to go. Next slide, please. Again, the visual field losses in glaucoma. The very top is what we normally want to see over a period of time with especially open angle glaucoma. We start losing a peripheral field of vision. But because you don't feel anything, you don't see anything, why bother coming in? You got better things to do. And then until you get to the bottom where you're pulled over because you've been in too many accidents because you've got no peripheral vision. When we get to that severe stage, there's not much we can do. And the sad part of it is you didn't have to get there. So I guess the moral of the story really of all of this is regular eye health examinations. And really, there's not an excuse for it because it's covered by the government today in Alberta for anyone 65 and over with an Alberta health card number. Next slide, please. Again, early detection is the thief in the dark. We've got normal vision, glaucoma, and of course the end stage of advanced glaucoma, which is very sad because really, unlike anything else, we just can't generate the vision. Once it's gone, it's gone. And, people say, well, I heard that there's an eye transplant going on. I said, well, yeah, that's right. I heard that there was an eye transplant going on. But remember, the eye is different than the heart or the kidney, and you can't really get it from another person because the heart and the kidney are pumping stations. So as long as we have a tissue match, we're okay. An eye, yes, we can get the organ perhaps working, but the processing of the information, that cable, is the one that's unique to every single person because that information, the neurons are going to your brain to process the information. So, that's why when I see something and you see something, we may see exactly the same thing, but how it gets to our brain is in process is quite different. So until we can do a brain transplant, we probably aren't going to be able to restore vision once it's gone because it's all about perception. And so we got to protect that optic nerve, which is all the cables that process all that information that we see in our brain. Next slide, please. So again, the best advice that I can give you for the prevention of glaucoma, and there isn't anything that you can do to prevent it other than coming in for a regular health eye examination, 65 and over, or sooner if there's a predisposition in the family. Glaucoma usually starts as ugly little chorus in the ages of around 40. So it's really important to have a previous record to compare to where you are now. And now we have everything digitally, electronically done. It's very easy to do. And so we have the baseline that's you, not some textbook example. So that's the most important thing. And people say, can you prevent glaucoma? No. Glaucoma is genetic in many cases or accidental. In other words, no, you can't prevent glaucoma, but you can prevent losing your vision if you come in. Next slide, please. And that is really all I have to say today. If there are any questions, please don't hesitate to ask me. I've got the Q&A. I'm just going to look at that right now. Does glaucoma return? Well, the point is you never really are glaucoma free. And so the idea is to prevent glaucoma from progressing. That's what we want to do. How common is double vision after cataract surgery? I would like to say it shouldn't be common at all, but it is because people don't listen to what the ophthalmologist says. And remember, I was telling you, it's so critical to be very sedentary after you have the surgery done so that as we call IOL or lens implant, adheres to the back of the capsule in the proper orientation. So you want to just give yourself a week of doing nothing so that fusion can occur. If not, yes, you will get double vision, and then you've got a problem because we cannot redo the surgery. What's the difference between glaucoma and macular degeneration? Quite a bit. Glaucoma is where you lose the central area, the peripheral area of vision. Macular degeneration is when the blood vessels at the back of the eye leak and bleed. So they're quite different from each other. Glaucoma, again, is where the pressure builds up and destroys the optic nerve, so you lose your peripheral field of vision. In macular degeneration, the blood vessels in the central part of the eye bleed and they turn into scar tissue. So it affects your central area of vision. So macular degeneration by far is the most common, and it affects your central area of vision. A glaucoma is the peripheral area of vision is affected. Macular degeneration is worse because people don't really pay attention to peripheral vision. But central vision, when you're trying to read, you're trying to eat, you're trying to do anything centrally, you cannot see. So there's a difference. Let me see. We have one more here. If you are your eye and steroid drops for managing an eye condition for years, or anything else you can do, not take the steroid out to avoid glaucoma. No, but if you're on steroid medication, you may be, because we use steroids for treatment of various different eye conditions as well. For example, if you've got the uveitis, we often use steroids, and we have to use massive doses of steroids, like ileitis, colitis, Crohn's disease. You need to take because you got to prevent the inflammation from going on. But again, whoever is giving you the steroid medication for sure is watching you for glaucoma. So you never want to stop the steroid medication without asking your physician, because that would be really bad and detrimental to your vision. Any other questions? Well, I don't see any, but if there are, you're always welcome to send me an email as well. I don't mind at all.
Excellent. That was a really good one. Thank you, Dr. Monea. Nope, we still
Thank
don't
you.
have any more questions. So if you haven't already seen the other two presentations, make sure you visit our YouTube channel, which is Unison, and then the numbers 50, and then the word plus. And you can see the other two presentations by Dr. Monea. Dr. Monea, again, thank you so much for
You're
all of
very
your
welcome.
wisdom, and it's everybody's been super happy.